The idea of self-love is spoken about endlessly in self-help, and I really feel like the concept gets thrown around so much that it's lost all of its meaning. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to share a bit of a story from my own life so we can examine and explore the idea of self-love and actually nail down a definition and approach to actually achieving self-love. So this story happened a couple of years ago when I lived in Sydney, and a friend and I were just leaving her place for a dinner reservation, and she was driving. So we're walking down her driveway and we're about halfway to her car, and she starts fumbling through her handbag. And she basically stops for a moment, just pauses, and she says, "So stupid, can't believe I've done this, so dumb." Just sort of mutters it to herself under her breath, and she realized that she'd lost her keys. So we essentially had to go back inside. And when she said that, it broke my heart a little bit, because she's someone I care about a lot. And it was this really, really stark moment of cruelty that she had directed at herself. And it stuck with me so much that I'm still referring to it even now, even a couple of years later, in a YouTube video. And it seems really minor, what she said to herself, but you have to think for a second just how horrible it would be if, for instance, I spoke to her that way for just a really simple mistake that we've all made. If I just stopped her and said, "Hey Jennifer, you're just a complete idiot for losing your keys. Seriously? What the hell's wrong with you? Just get it together. We're running late. Get your keys, figure it out." Can you imagine if I spoke to her that way? Like, you wouldn't be able to call me a friend or someone that would care about her or someone that you'd even want to be around. You'd be probably fair in saying that I was abusive if I spoke to her that way. Yet, every single day, people all over the world, people like you and me, engage in an internal dialogue that is just as abusive, right? It has the exact same energy, the same intent behind it, right? It's not directed at someone else, that would be abusive, but when we direct it to ourselves, we don't really think twice about it. So this idea of just tearing ourselves apart for just any simple mistake, and even worse than that, these mistakes could be from years ago. There could be mistakes that happened, even so I've heard people replaying events that happened decades ago, just over and over and over in their minds, and it's basically a type of self-abuse, right? It's essentially self-abuse. So the reason I brought up that story is so that you can clearly see what self-abuse is, right? Speaking to yourself or treating yourself in this dismissive, toxic, denigrating way, and then working from there so that we can actually understand what self-love is. And my real gripe is that I feel like modern self-help doesn't really have any strong definition of what self-love is. It seems to be these really vague ideas that hover around just being nice to yourself and being kind to yourself, which I agree with, but it doesn't actually provide you a framework to how to arrive at self-love as a practice, as a state of being. So my idea of self-love is really, really simple, and it goes something like this. If you had someone who you cared about really deeply, if you had someone that you cared about incredibly deeply, with all of your heart and your soul, you cared about them so much, how would you treat them? If you wanted them to be as happy, healthy, and whole as possible, what would you do for them? How would you treat them? And how would you speak to them? And for me, that's a really simple quote that you can return to as a bit of a prompt for self-love. So when you approach self-love this way, it becomes clearer as to how to achieve it, and actually clearer to understand what self-love actually is. And look, really, there's only a few things that we've really got in life as guarantees, and the self is one of them. So no matter where you go, what you do, what you achieve, yourself, the self, is a friend that will always remain with you. So I have to consider, if the self is a friend that you should care about, what would you do for them? Once again, how would you treat them? If you had a friend who was trying to chase down a fitness goal and had been training 5 days a week, and they just happened to miss a day, what would you say to them? Would you say, "Hey dude, you're a complete and utter screw up, you're a failure, you've been training 5 days a week and you just missed a day, you screwed up"? Or would you just give them some gentle encouragement, some gentle words of advice, Something like, hey, look, man, it's okay. You know, you've been doing great so far. You've been really good and consistent with your efforts. Keep going, pick yourself up, and just make sure to train tomorrow. Something like that. That would be something that is such a clear and easy way to advise a friend, but it seems like such a complicated and bizarre way to speak to yourself. And here's another example. If you wanted your friend to be as physically healthy as possible, what sort of food would you bring them to eat? That's a simple question, right? If you cared about someone and you wanted them to be healthy, you'd bring them really healthy food, like chicken breast and broccoli and veggies and, you know, whole foods, meats, you know, something like that. It's very clear. But when it comes to ourselves, then we sort of we don't consider that self-love or caring about ourselves. Say you had a friend and you wanted them to be as mentally healthy as possible. How would you speak to them? Would you be kind to them? Would you speak to them with gentle encouragement and kind words? Or would you speak to them with a really harsh sort of internal dialogue? And other simple stuff like, what sort of friends would you tell this friend of yours to associate it with? Would you want them to associate with friends who, again, are also kind and encouraging and motivated and ambitious and full of energy? Would you tell them to associate with people who are destructive and negative and toxic? So even with that, you can see that's another example of self-love that people wouldn't consider. Just keeping a better friends group, right? Keeping better company is a form of self-love. So you can go on and on and on with all sorts of examples of self-love. And I give those examples to show you that with this framework, it's an incredibly simple framework, you can basically find self-love in all sorts of everyday acts, all kinds of very simple acts. Like I said, even the pursuit of physical, mental, and spiritual fitness is self-love. And that's if you do it for the sake of love and nourishment, right? Not trying to punish yourself by, you know, say going to the gym 7 days a week, like I just screwed up, you know, I'm not fit enough, and punishing yourself, but doing it as an actual practice of growth. That is a form of self-love. Something like, you know, making sure that your living space is clear and, you know, peaceful and calm. That's a form of self-love, because you can imagine, you know, if you had a friend and, you know, their place was a mess, what would you do for them? You would probably clean up their place and make it really nice and clean and smell good and be all organized. That's something you would do for a friend that you cared about. And if you care about yourself, then you should take care of your living space as well. And basic stuff, taking care of your health, you know, enjoying time with good friends. You know, if you can imagine, if you had a friend who was really down and really flat, what would you do for them? You would maybe encourage them, like, hey, come out with some friends and, you know, let's go chill out. You know, maybe some more existential things like pursuing your life's purpose and living an authentic life. These are things that are versions of self-love. Again, if you had a friend, you would encourage them, hey, look, chase down your dreams. You know, go for gold. Chase down every single goal that you've got, and, you know, live a truthful and authentic life. Be yourself. You know, if you had a really good friend, they'd want you to be who you really are, right? Speak in your own voice. That's something that a good friend would advise you to do. So even living your truth, living authentically, is a form of self-love. Basic things like, you know, even recovery, right? Imagine you've been, like I said, training 5 days a week. You've been hustling. You've been, I don't know, like me, making YouTube videos, writing, studying, working, and just being absolutely crushing life. And you're feeling a little bit burnt out. Imagine a friend came to you saying that. What would they say? They'd probably say, hey, look, take a bit of a rest. You know, that's a form of self-love. You know, even, you know, smaller acts like celebrating your progress, you know, celebrating achievements. You know, if you had a friend who had, you know, just graduated university, or, you know, they'd never trained before and they managed to, you know, train for a month straight consistently, you know, they would celebrate with you. Like, they'd say, hey, look, man, or lady or person, hey, good job. Like, you've done really well. And I know all of this may sound a bit cringy or corny to celebrate all these things and trying to do these, approach these small acts as forms of self-love. But what I'll say as a counter to that is perhaps you haven't examined the concept of self-love deeply enough, because, and look, it's not your fault necessarily. It's not spoken about in culture, really. It's not spoken about in schools or universities or anywhere, really. So I wouldn't blame you for not considering what I'm saying to be an accurate presentation of self-love. But nonetheless, I still think that my point holds. And what I would say as well is, don't underestimate the power of positivity or negativity, especially in terms of words or intent, when you turn those words and intent inward. Because I think that I know that they hold an incredible amount of power. And for me, I found this approach to self-love to be quite practical and grounded. So notice nothing I've said is anything really fluffy or ambiguous. These are everyday acts, right? Simple things: cleaning, making sure your living space is clear, right? Like if you look at my space, it's quite clear behind me, even though it's still, a set for a YouTube video. Taking care of your physical health, celebrating wins, being social. These are ways that you can express self-love. Very, very simple, very, very grounded. And I know it's easier said than done. I know that this reframe of self-love, it's not going to be immediate. So I know it will take time for most people to start to approach these things as a form of self-love and to actually be kinder to yourself. So what I would recommend is to return to the quote that I had earlier on in the video, which was, what would you do for someone if you cared about them deeply? How would you approach them? How would you treat them? And you can return to that as a bit of a cue, a bit of a prompt for self-love. So to dig a bit deeper as to why you should even consider self-love, because I know, look, I'm not a red pill guy. I'm not any sort of manosphere guy, but I see that, look, my intended audience is human beings in general. However, as a person who's been a young man before, I've seen a lot of the content out there that speaks to young men, and it's got this sort of naive idea of what stoic is, which is just emotionless, right? So if you're someone who's coming from that sort of approach, then what I'm saying probably seems like a bit of rubbish, just some emotional, soft rubbish. But here's my counter to you, if that's your approach. And here's my challenge to you. What good is achieving all of your wildest dreams and everything that you've ever hoped for if you're so full of self-hatred that you can't even enjoy it? Have a think about it. What's the point? What's really the point if you've got a yacht, you've got a mansion, you've got all the fast cars, everything that you ever wanted, but you can't sit with yourself. You can't sit in a room with your own thoughts without just being consumed by self-hatred. Look, you might have your own answer. Maybe that's an exchange that you're happy to make. You're happy to have all of those sort of external measures of success and still be suffering inside. But for me, the answer would be there's no point. There's no real point to that sort of life, because you risk basically being surrounded by all of these measures of success and being completely alone. So my challenge would be to you, consider why you're doing this. This pursuit of self-help, self-growth, self-actualization. What are you actually doing it for? It was to lead a better life. And consider that a better life is not merely dictated by these measures of status, right? A better life is dictated by the internal texture of your mind and your soul. What's actually going on between your ears? What is it like to be you day to day? Okay? So I hope that you can find some small kindness for yourself. I hope this video helped you in some way. And yeah, thanks for watching. Check the links in the description. I've got my Substack. I publish once a week, basically on all sorts of topics just like this. And I'll see you in the next one. Take care.